I'm Dr. G4, and welcome to Proto-Future, a podcast about taking 2.5 years to make an episode. This is episode 12, Gap Pilot Part 2. In this episode, I finish my pilot trip to Pittsburgh and bike all the way back to Connellsville, trying desperately to fit in train-related content along the way. So sorry for missing last month, and technically a little bit of this one too, but I obviously have been quite busy. I'll try to keep things going regularly, and I'll try to train myself to finally start making shorter episodes that'll be easier to put out on a monthly basis, but otherwise this is again a very busy, very crazy, and very scary time, so I might slip every so often. A correction from the Gap Pilot Part 1, Roger Coleman masters these episodes, not mixes, as one could probably have inferred from the veritable absence of background music. Whoops, sorry about that, Roger. Thank you for your help. Another note, I hope this isn't too distracting, but I'm recording this voiceover outside on a breakwater next to a ferry pier. It's a long story as to how I got to this point. Maybe you'll learn about it someday in 5 to 7 years is about the going rate at this point, but I'm doing the best I can. One final thing before we get into this episode, the upcoming next 4 episodes are actually some of my best work yet. I am so excited for what's to come. I've literally been working on some of this for years. You're going to get 2 interviews with 2 extremely interesting people, whom you may or may not have heard of before, possibly even more coming in the future, and interspersed with them, you'll get a very, very special 2-part series, but I shan't give any hints as to what it's about. You'll just have to hang in there and know that really cool things are coming. Anyway, on with the show. As it so happens, because I stayed at Pramani's past midnight, the audio file was labeled as being for the next day, so I actually missed my a little bit too gay for my own good goodbye to the staff from the previous night.
Thank you, Miss Sir, for the stupendous evening. I wish you a day and weekend as wonderful as your hair.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love you too.
Drunk people in cars, what could go wrong?
Okay, in addition to its historicity, they did provide great late-night eats and spectacular service, so if you're ever in the area, 10 out of 10 would recommend. Having fed myself closer to morning than evening, I proceeded to wind-chill myself to death back to the hotel room, passing some very entertaining people along the way.
Oh my god, that scared me. I'm sorry.
I'm not that scary, I promise.
You're beautiful, but I'm just scared.
Thank you! I don't think I'm that beautiful, but let's go ahead.
And with that out of the way, I made it back to the hotel and slept through the night. And late into the next morning.
Good morning, Pittsburgh. It is a positively gorgeous day out. I just bag-checked my panniers with the concierge, which is extremely useful, as I have discovered, allowing me to explore cities much more lighter and nimbly than I normally would have the opportunity to do so. There are ways out there to lock panniers to a bicycle rack. I just haven't acquired any of them yet, partially because I'm still recouping the exorbitant expense of sleeping.
Some companies offer simple retractable cable locking systems, and you can weave them through the straps of your panniers to secure them. And while this does offer peace of mind, I've personally largely found it unnecessary. In all of my bicycling, I've realized that the more bags you have, the less people mess with them. Excluding the tent, which really isn't worth anywhere near as much used, there seems to be a general understanding, even among non-cyclists, that they'd be just stealing a bag of stinky, dirty laundry. So while it's a good idea to lock up your stuff for safekeeping, it's not overwhelmingly necessary as to preclude you from adventuring in the first place. That all being said, though, the main point of this is that if you ever spring for a hotel, you can ask them to concierge check your bags, holding them until you pick them up later, only just as you're ready to leave town. This is a magnificent life hack, as it allows you to avoid late checkout fees, but not need to manhandle luggage around town while you explore, effectively cheating an extra day's adventures out of your itinerary. While we're on the subject, Amtrak also allows the same, holding bags at the station for only $10, sometimes free, with a same-day ticket, massively flexibilizing adventuring.
I actually woke up much earlier than I was expecting, even with the fairly late night. So I now have about an hour before I really need to get going. Oh, this is interesting. It's a large square that has a bunch of vendors in it of some sort. There are a bunch of things I want to do in Pittsburgh that have been on my list for quite a while, but not many of them can be done in only an hour. So I think I might do the Fort Pitt Blockhouse Museum, the raison d'etre for the city itself. God, this is a simply gorgeous cycleway down Penn Avenue. I would love to have literally anything this bougie wherever I live. There are lots of people too. Despite it being comparatively early on a Sunday morning, the streets are absolutely bustling. I find that impressive. Oh, interesting. It seems I have a light that runs independently of the automobiles, because I have to cross from one side of the road to the other through the automobile's path. How intriguing. Never done this before. Oh, and it's me now. I get single control of the entire intersection. What do you know? You can feel the peninsula narrowing. So to anybody who doesn't know, Pittsburgh sits at the confluence of the Monongahela River from the south and the Allegheny River from the north as they flow west and they turn into the Ohio River. What would traditionally be considered downtown Pittsburgh sits on a triangle formed by the confluence. It's a fairly traditional American city in that there are lots of highways eviscerating the downtown area. You know, to hell with it. I'm going to go to the confluence itself since I'm here. This is a gorgeous park that they managed to carve out. Point State Park it is. It's simply stunning and gorgeous. It provides wonderful green space and blue space. Across the river to my right is, well, now it's Acrisure Stadium. It's Heinz Stadium. And the Carnegie Science Center. The Science Center I remember from visiting when I was young on a cross-country trip and seeing their positively ginormous O-scale 3 rail layout meant to depict the history of the area. Oh, public restrooms. That's always nice. No, I've never actually come at it from this angle. I've always been fairly close to water level. On the banks of the Monongahela, now in front of me, and to my left, there's the Duquesne Incline. D-U-Q-U-S-Q-U-Q-U-E-N-E, something like that. Duquesne, they say it.
Across the river was visible a CSX train highballing it westbound. Pittsburgh history and geography makes it such that it has an uncommonly high density of railroads, and further still, what railroads there are highly concentrated in valleys. Plus, the rivers themselves make for spectacular viewing. It's unusual in the US to see that many freight trains on that many different main lines that clearly from that far away.
Seriously, it looks like a toy from this distance. One could say a model. Okay, Fort Pitt Blockhouse should be opening just about now. It's funny how much I've bicycled the city before, considering it's one I don't live in, and yet I still haven't found this part of the park until now. How interesting. Okay, is there any place I can lock up my bike? Yes, there is. The only thing that remains is a small blockhouse. But they have a very large museum right next to it. There we go. The fort was a 5-sided structure with a bastion at each corner and measured a half-mile in perimeter. And it looks like the museum is open. Okay. Hello, one ticket please.
Yep.
My mother calls me immature. Can I get a child's discount?
The following experience in the Fort Pitt Blockhouse was my first real attempt at broadcasting from inside a museum, and I hadn't really gotten the whole talking to myself in public thing down yet. In fact, it was precisely this experience which prepared me for the later Borealis series. Given that my attempt at recording myself inside the museum was deeply flawed, here's a summary of what I learned. The ancient Monongahela people inhabited the area for centuries, but mysteriously disappeared, being gradually replaced by the Delaware and Seneca peoples. The area then came to be controlled by the Iroquois Confederacy, an alliance of 6 major tribes in a society with sophisticated trade, governance, and justice. France made claims as early as the 1680s, seeing it as a natural way to connect its Canadian and Louisiana territories and close off westward English expansion. The wilderness paradise confluence of the Monongahela and Allegheny rivers, colloquially known as the Point, became the focus of the French and British rivalry during the colonial period. Due to its strategic location as both a river juncture and a defensible position, the French built land-facing brick ramparts up to the river's edge and even dug out a moat to isolate the point and make it an island accessible by only a few controlled bridges. This was named Fort Duquesne in honor of the Governor-General of New France, the Marquis Michel Anguet Duquesne de Ménéville, giving rise to many of the names and a crippling shortage of vowels in the area. The fort was enlarged regularly, and by 1754, it was the largest and most elaborate frontier fort, being a reverse frontier border control point between English and French territories. Thus began the city of Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, in an effort to project power into the region, the British king ordered a very young and completely unqualified Virginian general on an expedition to western Pennsylvania, a commander by the name of George Washington. As one might assume, this proved a ruinously bad decision, as the young Washington seemed to sorta completely accidentally assassinate the French emissary Joseph Coulon de Jumonville and associated Native American guides. The French were understandably a minor bit peeved at this cold-blooded slaughter, and decided to wallop the young Washington at the Battle of Jumonville Glen, forcing him to retreat, then hunker out in a hastily built Fort Necessity, which translates from colonial English as Fort Whoopsie-Daisy, as in, the fort was built out of necessity. After a brief battle, Washington was compelled to surrender to the French and marched his sorry ass back to the East Coast. The British king was understandably miffed at Washington's poor performance and sent out a General Edward Braddock to relieve him of his command. Arriving in Alexandria, Virginia, and marching to Winchester, Virginia, and then the military outpost in Cumberland, Maryland, Braddock marched the army very slowly back out to the point, clearing what became known as the Braddock Road, which itself soon became the U.S.'s first mistake. I mean publicly financed road, the National Road, and also served as the basis for the U.S.'s first disaster. I mean highway, the Lincoln Highway. The Brits briefly gained control of the point, renaming it Fort Pitt for the English Prime Minister William Pitt, but were quickly repulsed by Captain Claude-Pierre Pécardie de Contecoeur. French and Canadian militiamen wisely adopted Native American tactics with lots of hit-and-run guerrilla warfare, whereas the British were ill-suited for life in the wilderness. Due to Braddock's rampant racism, nearly all Native American tribes in the area were offended and allied themselves with the French in an effort to protect themselves from the Aryan English. As such, due to underestimating the Indians, Braddock's column was put under incredibly effective crossfire during a battle, in which he was wounded and passed away shortly thereafter. Knowing that the Native Americans would probably quite rightfully desecrate his grave, Washington, now battlefield promoted back to his original position and put in charge of yet another retreat, ordered Braddock buried in the middle of the road he cleared, then hid the grave by marching the entire army over the burial site. To this day, Braddock's remains are driven over somewhere beneath the National Pike. Upon his return to British-controlled territory, Washington was replaced again by Brigadier General John Forbes, who marched out of Philadelphia to make Forbes Road, roughly the route of the modern PA Climate Arson Pike. But importantly, he dropped a series of forts behind him to ease resupply. It was then that Fort Duquesne was captured for a final time and connected permanently to Philadelphia by the network of roads and forts called the Communication, firmly establishing Western Appalachia in control of the British. As a result of Washington's follies, skirmishes collectively known as the 7 Years' War occurred on all continents except Antarctica, being called the French and Indian War in the Americas and reaching from Nova Scotia to South Carolina, but centering mostly in the mid-Atlantic around Lake Champlain. Incidentally, it was the cost of defending the colonies that made the British later want to tax the colonists, so it was really Washington's ill-conceived diplomatic assassination which precipitated the entire American Revolution. While France was in the right, it lost the upper hand in the Appalachians due to a blockade by the British which starved the French fur trappers and resulted in an economic reorientation in favor of the Brits, and the ultimate loss of all the lands between Appalachia and the Mississippi River. Upon the French losing the war, the allied Native American tribes trying to escape English racism were put in a very tough bargaining position. But rather than money or trade, the British appetite for land was voracious. With the construction of Fort Pitt and the communication, settlers flowed massively out west. Now, Fort Pitt was a frontier in the other direction, straining British resources to control the Mississippi River. Tensions between the settlers and the Native Americans resulted in Pontiac's uprising in 1763, with native leader Pontiac successfully attacking a bunch of British forts in the Great Lakes area at Presque Isle, Sault Ste. Marie, and other locations. During the American Revolution, the Brits even abandoned Fort Pitt to consolidate their positions, ceding territory to the Native Americans once again. However, a group of Virginians retook the fort and waged war westward against the British based out of Fort Detroit. Now, the Native Americans allied themselves with the British, an alliance based around a common cause: once again, stop the colonists in their relentless push westward. Raids on forts in the Lake Erie area killed the Americans' only remaining native ally, Delaware Chief White-Eye, and the push to Fort Detroit was abandoned. However, the raids by British allied Native Americans continued, and General Washington ordered the eradication of the Iroquois Confederacy with the Sullivan Campaign, engaging in total warfare, the destruction of villages and burning of crops to starve the Native Americans into submission. Never again was the Iroquois Confederacy a major political power, and 5,000 refugees fled to British Fort Niagara after what some historians have deemed a genocide. Even after the war, hatred and racism seeded during the Revolution continued throughout the West. After the Revolution, Fort Pitt was the only permanent military establishment of U.S. troops aside from West Point. By 1786, the garrison of Fort Pitt consisted of only 12 men. But as Fort Pitt declined, Pittsburgh rose. Nowadays, most of the fort is gone. Underneath, what else? A highway. But the Fort Pitt Museum does preserve and offer tours of the single surviving blockhouse and a reproduction log cabin, as well as the history of Pittsburgh beyond the frontier days, including a flag from the Whiskey Rebellion and an exhibit interpreting the stories of the Native American tribes in the area in the modern day. On my way out, I stopped off at the gift shop to buy one small book about a guy's travels up and down the Gapco Trail, and headed back outside.
There you are. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, you too. Okay. Back on the bike, and back to the hotel to pick up my panniers. Then I can begin in earnest. Interestingly, there's this very large fountain structure underneath the highway, making an otherwise fairly pedestrian hostile experience into at least an interesting one. I will take a slightly different route back to the hotel to see more and new things. Back on the cycle track. And how lovely, a motorcycle cop has parked in the middle of the cycle track. What's the phrase? Bad cop, no donut?
I made it back to the hotel to pick up my stuff and headed out for a waterfront loop tour of town before picking up the Gapco Trail back to Connellsville.
I am sufficiently comfortable and prepared. I have my panniers. I also packed 3 extra bladders of water in addition to my camelback, such that no matter how hot it gets and no matter how badly this may go, I should have more than enough in the way of survival supplies. Though I doubt anything could really go that badly, because, and that's one of the benefits of a designated bicycle trail, you're never too far away from services or repairs. Presumably, the worst it could get would be a 10-mile walk to the next town for a bike shop. Alright, I'm taking a gorgeous trip down a curving low waterfall on a ramp under the Pittsburgh Convention Center, which will bring me to water level on the Allegheny. I'm heading north right now. And taking a left. Oh, there's so many gorgeous bridges ahead of me. At least 4 of them, all distinctly Pittsburgh yellow. I'm a little bit behind schedule, but I always am very pessimistic in my scheduled travel times, allowing me to make it up usually very quickly, and giving me flexibility if I want to stop and see things that I didn't know were there during planning. The Andy Warhol Bridge along 7th Street. Oh, there are lots of people here. Fishers, mothers with prams. It always gives me anxiety to bicycle next to large bodies of water with nothing protecting me from it. If, I don't know, a strong gust of wind comes along, I'm blown over and drenched. Passing the, I believe, baseball stadium on the other side, heading further west. I'll curve around the point. Historically, I have done the Gap Trail, which stays on the north side of the Monongahela for a while. But even though it follows the route of the old B&O, unfortunately, most of the route is deathly uninteresting, going right down the middle of a highway median. Very unappealing, uninteresting. So, instead, and especially since I've already done that portion, I think I will cross the Monongahela to get to the south side, near Station Square, on the last bridge I can before the confluence. I think there's a trail that's bikeable that clings to the side of the highway bridge, but I at least should have a more interesting and more visual journey on the south side, even though they join up a couple miles later, maybe half a dozen. Alright, underneath the highway back at Point State Park, but water level this time. Once again treated to a delicious view down the Ohio. If I recall correctly, the Allegheny River is a lot bluer and the Monongahela is a lot browner, so you can actually see the confluence and the mixing from above. So many people out here, it's wonderful. Lots of hiker-bikers. And crossing the medallion, the confluence and the highest mile marker of the Gap Trail. They have a fantastic fountain that's very high-reaching water and low-profile everything else. So from certain views, it looks like it just melts into the surrounding water. Actually, hell, I think some of the spray literally does with the wind. So unfortunately, it appears that there's construction ahead, so I couldn't even take the proper length of the gap. So I will have to turn, but the question is how? Is there a way up that does not involve stairs? I mean, I can lift my bike, obviously, nothing too big there, it's just I don't want to.
Actually, a more measured response from many more years of experience is that, yes, I can lift my bike easily. Dry. Loaded to the brim with survival gear, however, and I'd say not really and definitely not easily. Furthermore, that bicycle was one of the more premium e-bikes, weighing only about 50 pounds. More regular e-bikes can easily exceed 70, again, dry, without cargo. As such, a community having appropriate accommodations for bicycles is not just a comfort, but quite necessary for equity. As much as possible, stairs should be avoided, which has the extra benefit of making a route fully ADA accessible. Allowing for bicycles, scooters, and wheelchairs makes for more inclusive so-called wheeling, meaning that all proper bicycle infrastructure is simultaneously ADA infrastructure and vice versa. In the heinous event that there's absolutely no choice but to have a stairway on a route, a metal or concrete chute should adorn one side of the stairway to slot bicycle wheels into and allow for easy pushing up and down the flight.
Follow the trail detour signs, go around the Fort Pitt Museum again. Now I'm up at park level. Taking a quick right turn up a ramp that's built into the wall of the Fort Pitt Museum itself. Ooh. That is a very narrow passageway. It's barely one bicycle wide. Ew. Once again, playing second-class citizen to the almighty automobile. Literally. If somebody's coming in the opposite direction, I do not foresee a way that we could actually pass without dismounting. Also, I am literally at highway level. I'm protected by a nice wall, but this is a highway. So weird, you never get to experience these at like human-sized walking pace. Okay, I've hit the main portion of the bridge, and I have a low railing on one side protecting me from falling into the Mon, and I have a metal grating on the other, on the outside of the bridge supports. This is a double-decker bridge. 4 lanes each deck, lower level heading south. That's where I am. I'm on the west side of the bridge. As cool as downtown Pittsburgh is, many of its surrounding neighborhoods are not. This side of the Monongahela is at the base of some very large bluffs. That's why there are the 2 inclines, or at least the 2 surviving inclines. One of them is the tourist attraction, the Duquesne Incline. Another is municipally run. So, thank you. Yep, we literally did have to do a dismount, and oh fun, there's another one. We barely squeezed by. So the interesting neighborhood, I think it's called Mount Washington, is literally atop the mountain. On river level, there used to be tons of factories. Beg pardon. Thank you. Nowadays, since the factories have been demolished, they have been replaced with America's favorite thing, parking. And so there's literally nothing here. In order to get to the Duquesne Incline, you have to travel across these awful empty stroads and then park in a literal gravel parking lot. The only reason why you ride the Duquesne Incline is as the tourist attraction, not actually for transit. The other incline is itself actually through ticketed with the metro, I think. So it is a meaningful component of regional transit infrastructure, if not a stellar one. Inclines are nice, we should have more of them. Oh, I forgot about this. In order to actually get to the Dam Duquesne incline, you have to cross a pedestrian bridge over the Strode. Oh god. This passageway is so tight. My handlebars barely fit. Dear goodness. That strikes me as a system in need of optimization, dramatically. Okay. I can finally, it seems, leave the wretched Strode behind. Oh, and there's a Norfolk Southern train. Here's there are two main lines here. NS has the one that's a little higher on the hill. CSX is by the water. Okay, I am now heading in the correct direction, east-southeast along the south bank of the Monongahela. There's a very large stern paddle wheeler set up, and you can see Point Park and the enormous jet of water, maybe more than 40 feet in the air. I don't intend to take you along the whole journey. I'll go through stops and starts as things get interesting. But at least here, so close to downtown and major neighborhoods, I'll keep you on for a while, see what I see, maybe describe some of the views and infrastructure. Right now I'm closer to the CSX tracks, actually immediately adjacent to them. Pittsburgh has so many train tracks, it always stupefied me why they never had a commuter or regional rail system. Well, they actually used to. It's called PATH, or Path Train or something. It was an interesting 1980s brown, orange, and yellow paint scheme.
The Baltimore and Ohio's Grant Street Station served as the longest-lasting commuter terminal in town, the Pennsy having culled its 6 lines in 1964. That same year, Pittsburgh, like many northeastern cities of the time, concocted a Port Authority, or PAT, which assumed control of the streetcars. By 1975, it was clear that commuter trains were not financially viable, and PAT assumed control of the primary remaining commuter operation, the B&O's 7 daily round trips between Pittsburgh and the McKeesport area. Notably, the train was partially supported by PennDOT. Oh, those were the days. Pat bought 2 locomotives and 9 coach cars, painting them in an attractive, if offensively 1970s paint scheme of cream, brown, and orange. The Mon Valley Commuter Rail was creatively branded by Pat as the Pat Train, 1T, and starting in 1974, it operated 2 4-car trains between B&O's Grant Street Station, right in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, later raised and replaced with, as always, a heinous waterfront highway, and McKeesport, 25 minutes away. Several coaches were retrofitted with cabs to allow for push-pull operation. Occasionally, RDCs were also used. Initial ridership was low, stunted by a denial of state funding for track upgrades, but increasing frequency almost pentupled ridership within 3 years. Vocal detractors complained at the high subsidy per passenger, but failed to account for the fact that buses are subsidized at much higher levels via road construction. Furthermore, Pat was twice as fast as the equivalent bus to McKeesport. In 1981, the McKeesport Transportation Center opened to allow intermodal transfer between trains and buses, even briefly being served by the Capital Limited as a suburban stop to the Pittsburgh area. Astonishingly, the transit center still stands to this day, albeit no longer serving any trains because modern PennDOT is composed entirely of automobile apologists and climate arsonists. Additional work improved several stations and added a new one at Port View, although intermediate stops at Hazelwood and Glenwood were discontinued. The Mon Valley was doing quite well for itself, with 8 round trips every weekday and 5 on Saturday, a rather respectable schedule even by today's standards. In line with railroad tradition, the Port Authority assigned a name to every timetable round trip from the McKeesport area to Pittsburgh, calling them the Pat Train, Early Bird, Pittsburgher, Golden Triangle, Shopper, Midday, Mon Valley, McKeesporter, and Yakagani. Hope briefly existed for a passenger rail revival when PennDOT funded the creation of another commuter train, the Parkway Limited, from Greensburg to Pittsburgh Penn Station via Irwin, Swissvale, and Wilkinsburg, while they were reconstructing in 1981 what later became known as I-376. But the puny 2 daily round trips contracted out to Conrail and using Amtrak surplus equipment lasted a mere 8 months. However, along with the rise of Automo nonsense and self-obsession-driven isolation in the 1980s, the Pat train had one additional hurdle thrown its way not often faced by passenger trains, the deindustrialization of the Mon River Valley. Ridership slumped through the 80s, and the train was discontinued in 1989 after less than 15 years in operation. Since that time, McKeesport lost what little relevance it had, and has slid clean off the map into obscurity. When Pat Train shut down, the coaches were sold to Connecticut to help with the startup Metro North Shoreline East service, and the locomotives were donated to the Galveston Railroad Museum. In the 23 January 1972 issue of the Pittsburgh Press, an unnamed B&O official presciently observed, "It's no secret that we're losing money. People are just going to have to realize that highways are not the answer to the nation's transportation woes." Sadly, over half a century later, people are only just now waking up to this wisdom. Pat Train was a victim of broken times, but that it happened at all was an admirable effort, a lost art, really, in bringing regional rail to existing infrastructure, especially given how easy and cheap it is to pull off with modern vehicles, and given that many cities, but Pittsburgh especially, have
so many railroad tracks, so close to major and important areas. You would think that somebody would just run a DMU along it.
But this is America, and we can't have good things for less money, only bad things for more. I hate this country so goddamn fucking much.
Now we're entering, I think it's called Station Square. This used to be the old station of, I think, the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie.
Station Square was originally part of the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad Complex. Built in 1898 as a large, stately, cubic office building on the edge of the water, it served as the center of operations and main train station for the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie until the 1960s. But interestingly, it was also the primary intercity railroad terminal for the Baltimore and Ohio. The B&O station originally opened in 1887, a terminal right on the water's edge and in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, but it was demolished in 1955 for, of course, a highway, because we are a nation intent on having as many bad things as possible. To still accommodate its commuter operations, the tracks were cut back a few blocks to Grant Street and First Avenue, which to this day exists as a suspiciously railroad terminal-shaped plot, so-called scarcitecture. A very modest white concrete headhouse was built in a somewhat Art Deco-ish style, hosting only a few tracks in what was the last privately financed train station to be built in Pennsylvania. Grant Street, of course, served Pat Train until its closure in 1989, and the station was demolished in 1998, although the Gap bicycle trail still follows the exact route the station approach tracks did in weaving about a nasty highway hellscape into downtown. I seem to remember an old John Armstrong track plan detailing operations at this unique station, but for the life of me I can't find it. If anybody else remembers when and where it was, I'd be extremely appreciative. Given the stub-ended nature of the terminal, the B&O used Grant Street primarily for commuter trains, while intercity trains were diverted over to Station Square starting in 1934 in an arrangement with the PNLE, giving the headquarters of what was originally a smaller regional line a suddenly outsized role in national transportation. The only exception to this were the B&O's two RDC trains which ran between Washington, D.C. and Pittsburgh Grant Street, called the Daylighters, for offering daytime service along a route typically plied by night trains. Most of the B&O's mainline passenger trains, however, passed over the PNLE, including the Capital Limited, Columbian, and Washington-Chicago Express, all running, obviously, from D.C. to Chicago, the Washingtonian and Cleveland Night Express, running Cleveland-Washington and Cleveland-Baltimore, respectively, the Ambassador, from Baltimore to Detroit via Toledo, and the Shenandoah from Chicago to Jersey City. The PNLE also ran trains of its own out of Station Square, in cooperation with the New York Central, primarily the Pittsburgh-Buffalo Express via Erie, with through sleepers to Toronto and Albany, the Pittsburgh-Detroit Express, and the Steel King from Cleveland to Pittsburgh, also offering through sleepers to D.C. on the B&O's Washingtonian. Unfortunately, the 1971 formation of Amtrak consolidated passenger operations to Pittsburgh Penn Station, and the 1985 discontinuance of the PNLE's own commuter trains, well, at this point, train, finally left Station Square's tracks quiet. However, unlike many sad stories of misguided railroad decline, all was not lost, and in fact its new life was already underway. The station had been placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1974, and a nationally leading preservationist, Arthur Ziegler II, was in charge of the Pittsburgh History and Landmarks Foundation. Decades ahead of their time, Landmarks bought the several PNLE buildings that now make up Station Square in 1976 with the intent to test out postmodern urban planning principles like mixed-use zoning and adaptive reuse of historic infrastructure. Slowly but surely, the area was converted and transformed, gaining a hotel, a dock for the Gateway Clipper fleet, shops, offices, restaurants, food halls, bars, entertainment venues, historic exhibits, and eventually even a soccer stadium. For only $100 million, about the cost of a single highway interchange, by reusing instead of rebuilding, Pittsburgh got the single most successful urban renewal project in its history. Station Square continues to this day as one of Pittsburgh's largest and most visited tourist attractions, and the Landmarks Foundation still educates 10,000 people a year on its historic and architectural significance. All just
across the river from downtown, but I think you could easily walk or get a trolley connection back in the day. Nowadays, I think there's a stop on the light rail. It's a very large and hip space that has been renovated. Very interesting and lively. There's a restaurant called the Grand Concourse built into the old headquarters building. And you can see the Pittsburgh light rail going into downtown across the river. It's a single LRV. They have a weird little system. high floor light rail. Parts are mixed running, parts are exclusive. Built, I think, by CAF, and then the earlier vehicles by an Italian company.
Actually, while Breda Costruzioni Ferroviarie did astonishingly build both buses and LRVs off of the same chassis, preeminently the old trolley buses in Seattle and the LRVs still being operated in Cleveland, Pittsburgh has mercifully no such heritage with those toaster ovens. The company later merging to form Ansaldo Breda, infamous for its unreliability and delays, and the corporate husk later being subsumed into Hitachi Rail Italy. PRT, by contrast, started operation of its light rail with 55 Siemens ST400s in 1985, putting it right at the very forefront of the new light rail craze sweeping the Anglophone world at the time. Later, they were supplemented by 28 LRVs from Construcciones y Auxiliar de Ferrocarriles, or CAF, in 2003, who also rebuilt the original 55 Siemens LRVs in 2005. Notably, Pittsburgh also rebuilt a dozen PCC cars in the 1980s, partly with leftover LRV parts, to make some truly unholy creations. PCC cars with giant flat square windshields. Ugh. Overall, for Pittsburgh's light rail, I strongly recommend checking out the July 1992 issue of Model Railroader magazine, which covers the history of the system, its vehicles, and even offers a track plan for operations.
Well, this is annoying. Just under the light rail bridge, the trail just goes away, and there's no sign of detour, no warning, but I can easily scoot around this. In fact, it even looks like there's a desire path clear onto the railroad right-of-way. This appears to be another area that's mid-gentrification. There are old abandoned warehouses and new renovated warehouses side by side. Very peculiar. Cobblestone. Yay. Crossing over the railroad tracks for a fantastic view of downtown. Truly stunning. Alright, back on the trail. Nice, gorgeous, shady. A bunch of stoners in a very colorfully graffitied parking lot meditating. Goodness, this entire bikeway is graffitied. Not only just the cinder block edges, but also the asphalt surface itself. It's so gorgeous and colorful. It looks like this kind of bikeway just almost grew organically out of itself, like it must have been some sort of old road or something. And it's so green, too. Like, were it not for the bridge stanchions poking up out of the trees, I really would not know that I'm in the city. Well, that and also the associated highway noise.
Cities aren't loud, cars are loud.
I wonder where and how this will connect with the rest of the gap. It's a verdant tunnel of green, with glimpses out to the river to my left. So many people are using it for biking and running and walking. Across the river, you can see the highway and the old B&O right-of-way. Now the gap snaking in and out of it. Pittsburgh does have a charm to it that many other places lack. It, like most places in America, has serious flaws. But it has personality, which is peeking through the car-centric infrastructure. Outside of the downtown and core areas, it is, like most places, if not more than most, a desolate wasteland of car infrastructure. But if you can find a way to live in the cute downtown communities, I doubt you'd ever find it boring or uninteresting. Ooh, a monument to steel workers carved out of industrial waste. Very interesting. The trail is now more manicured and diverging from the river. There are lots of geese and goslings. Most of the buildings here are new. There aren't that many of the old ones that were redeveloped. But they do seem to have put a lot of effort into preserving at least some of the history. Okay, if I am correct, this is where I've rejoined the gap. Where does the trail go? Great Allegheny Passage, 350 miles, Washington, D.C. On left. Oh, and the gap is actually an old and retrofitted railroad bridge that would have passed elevated over this neighborhood. So there's an interesting pseudo-spiral rectangular ramp going up to bridge level. I forgot about that. Mile marker 145. The Gap has its 0 mile marker in Cumberland, and the CNO towpath has its 0 mile marker in DC. But since it's basically a through ride as far as I'm concerned, it's just one grand trail. It just changes its name halfway along. Since this is familiar territory, I think I'll turn you off for now and focus on mile munching. I'll still bring you up again if I see anything interesting. My camelback is just a hair too short for this new backpack. I'll have to upgrade it. It's a little past noon, and the verdant green hillsides gave way instead to large gravel and asphalt craters, presumably the remnants of old steel mills. I just crossed away from the railroad tracks, and I believe, if I'm correct, I'm approaching Homewood. Or is it Homestead?
Homestead.
I also just passed the Sandcastle Water Park, which I guess is at least making use of the asphalt craters as parking, but I find it hard to imagine how a water park that small could require parking lots that big. So this area here used to be part of the, I believe, famous Homestead blast furnaces. They were involved in labor unrest and strikes. Of course, as is the case with basically all now Pittsburgh's furnaces, decline closed down was raised. But the interesting part now is that it has been replaced with a very large and interesting lifestyle center. To those who don't know, lifestyle centers are basically outdoor malls. You just take the mall and take the roof off. And they're made to look a little bit more walkable and livable on the interior. They're still surrounded by parking moats and somewhat difficult to access depending on your mode of transport. Not all of them are served by bike trails like this, but as far as the Gap goes, it does add a degree of intrigue. It means that you have many new and interesting restaurants to choose from. This is part of the first segment of the Gap that I did. I actually started doing it over the pandemic with my roommate. He and I would ride out, park at one end, and then ride 20 miles up, 20 miles back. It was a way to get out and explore places and do things when the world was otherwise shut down. This was early on in the pandemic, and so we had masks around our necks the whole time in case we were too close to walkers or bikers. It was an interesting time. We stopped at a burger joint in Homestead on the way back. It was exhausting. I now, though, have kind of gotten more into the bike packing lifestyle. I don't necessarily train per se. I do bike back and forth to work every day, but that's not long nor difficult. I've just acquired expertise. Bring extra water, wear biking shorts, offering convenient padding to prevent excessive fatigue, and then probably most importantly, every 10 miles or so, no matter how much of a roll I'm on, get off the damn bike. Stretch your legs, walk around, take even a 5-minute break. It really doesn't take as much effort as you think to bike long distances, because the beautiful thing about a bicycle, it's not like running. You can always just turn the gear lower and go slower. Easy peasy. You can also just always get off the bike, take a break, go to a restaurant, sit on a bench. Do that until you feel you've sufficiently recuperated. Because it's not a race. The only thing that matters is that you get to where you need to go at the end of the day. And you can get there as slowly as you desire. It's not that hard. I find it surprising that so few people bike in America these days, although with the recent e-bike rebates, it seems to be growing leaps and bounds. Maybe, and hopefully, we will become more like the Netherlands. We need more bicycle infrastructure. One thing I like about Pittsburgh is that it seems to be building it out. Alright. Even though the Gap is now riding along the edge of a road meant to access Homestead, we are clearly getting more into the post-industrial roots of the area. On your left, on your left, and on your left. Thank you. One of the fun things about the Gap, as someone who likes bicycles and trains, the Gap has them both. I'm currently climbing a bridge over, I think, 5 railroad tracks. Here's 2 main and a yard. This is the Whitaker flyover. There are coil cars stored on some of the tracks. I think, if I recall, we're somewhere on the outskirts of a yard. I'm kind of up on the hillside, whereas before I was down with the road and the train tracks. Now, I'm higher up the hill, not on the top, but kind of clinging to its side in the middle. Since this is no longer part of an old road or railroad grade, or adjacent to either, it's now much hillier, with notable up swells and down swells almost constantly. Brief moment of rest, nice picnic table. Across the river, I'm not certain, I think that's the Clarendon Works, which is kind of the last major steel mill here. I remember going to Rails to Pittsburgh just under a month ago and listening to a very interesting and fascinating presentation done by a very young gentleman who interned with them for one summer. He also interned with Norfolk Southern for another. He had very fascinating stories to tell. A very interesting view of the steelworks and river locks right in front of it. Even though it is kind of a post-industrial wasteland, the fact that Pittsburgh is still surviving and thriving in other areas kind of makes it less sad to look at. It's not like the whole area is declining. There's no melancholy to it. And this would be Kennywood. It's a very interesting little valley here to the right. Actually, yeah, you can hear the roller coaster cycling. I think they're doing pre-season testing right about now. I don't think they're officially open yet. So they're just waking things up from the winter. Kennywood, fairly standard trolley park story, somewhat historic and interesting amusement park. Worth going to if you're in the area, but not like a Disney, not worth going that far out of your way for, unless there's something special. The thing that is notable about it is that a lot of the roller coasters make use of the terrain, going up and down these small valleys. Right now, heading down the hill closer to track level, and I think there's one more flyover up ahead. Oh, there's our 2 switcher locomotives behind me on a very tall trestle. Mostly yellow and a bit of red. Alright, now I'm mostly track level again, sandwiched between the rails and another old long warehouse.
A little while later, down the river,
utilizing another old railroad bridge to cross the Monongahela again within sight of McKeesport. It's just past 12:30, so I've been bicycling for about an hour and 15 minutes from town. Really not bad, all things considered. Okay, fully across the Mon. Now, as I recall, this place, just northish of McKeesport, used to be an old Baltimore and Ohio Railroad shops complex. And in fact, if I am correct, and I'm pretty certain I am, I came through here last night, not this exact space, but maybe a little bit over to the east, on the Capital Limited. Oh, in front of me, there actually is, in fact, an old roundhouse, although it is boarded up. It's an old brick one, too. Not very big, even though it's like 270 degrees, like old short locomotives. Very interesting. There's another part of the shops complex over there that has embossed in brick 1905. Headwinds are unwelcome. The trail so far hasn't been in the greatest of shapes. It's very heterogeneous. Some areas are glass smooth. A lot of the areas have root bumps in the asphalt that make it slightly unpleasant. Okay, I'll pull off for a break here because I'm about, I don't know, maybe a dozen miles outside of Pittsburgh. This is a roundabout that has become a de facto trail access point. I have so far been here 3 other times. It's mile marker 133. The first time was during the pandemic. That first time my roommate and I decided to tackle the gap. This was our turning around point. Oh, I'm only a quarter of the way done. Oh, but I ain't dead yet. Reapply sunscreen. The second time I was here, again, same roommate, this is where we jumped off from. So instead of parking in Pittsburgh and biking here, we parked here and biked further. I think it was to West Newton, which will be the next major stop. The third time, it was just solo. I wanted to do another local trail. I think it's the Montour Trail, another rail trail. It doesn't start exactly near here, but it's close enough. So I decided, just for the hell of it, why not park the car here again, since I was already familiar with it. That one was just a day trip. It was technically a metric century, 100 kilometers, but still a single day, out and back. Okay, sunscreen.
In my quest to rid myself of problematic chemicals and consumer consumables, I have since shifted over to sun sleeves, products found in any cyclist shop that are basically nylon tubes you slide up your arms to protect them from sun damage. No constant supply of plastic-encased, ozone-obliterating chlorofluorocarbons needed. Those, plus cyclist gloves and big hats, and I've been able to almost completely wean myself of yet another unsustainable purchasing habit. Sure, sunscreen has a place at the beach, but for those in the back, Pittsburgh is not known for its tropical beaches. But I will admit these considerations are primarily due to the fact that I am
a pasty pale bitch.
I cannot believe that I said this sentence.
Okay. Sufficiently protected from BDSM daddy sun.
What happens next is very boring. I bicycled slightly away from the gap to check out a model railroad club. It was closed. I had previously had the opportunity to visit the McKeesport Model Railroad Club as part of the Rails to Pittsburgh convention, but I decided to motorcycle down the Ohio to a beautiful little campsite right on the banks of the river down by Parkersburg, West Virginia, but there were a series of thunderstorms on the way back that left me completely soaked to the bone and delayed me from partaking in any layout tours. That I couldn't visit the club was sad but unavoidable, as you should always, no matter what, partake of the more environmentally friendly vehicle, irrespective of inconvenience. That I took the motorcycle at all was more a function of the convention being held in Cranberry, Pennsylvania, a place offensively inaccessible by public transit. Either way, as I record this, I have just passed on the title of my motorcycle, so I am now officially in every way car-free, and I intend to remain that way for the rest of my life. If you can't get there by train, it's not a place worth going. Sadly, I never ended up making it to the McKeesport Model Railroad Club before I moved away.
There's a very interesting mixture of trail users. Everyone from leisure cyclists to exercisers to day trippers to even crazy hardcore nuts like myself. Okay, yes, these are the train tracks that I crossed on the Capital Limited. Bike trail goes to the right. $12.45. Ah, yes. And this is the railroad bridge I crossed over yesterday. So I think this is where we leave the Monongahela. If I'm correct, I think that one continues more southerly towards Morgantown, West Virginia. And we instead parallel Youghiogheny. That is another one of the Pittsburgh area's fantastic spellings. Youghiogheny. Phonetically, it more resembles Youghiogheny, but it's pronounced almost with a CK. McKeesport is a much smaller and much less interesting little suburb. definitely a little bit more in Rust Belt territory, with its economy and sensibilities firmly rooted in the 1970s. This is a portion of the gap that is just stitched together out of old roads and parking lots, not a rail trail. And at least they're putting it to some good use. It reminds me a little bit of the Capital Area Greenbelt in Harrisburg, which is a city-encompassing bicycle trail built, not exclusively, but largely out of decommissioned roads. That makes it a very interesting ride, and definitely leads into the more apocalyptic viewings, because you don't have a nice new bicycle-sized trail. Oh no, you instead get something that was built for something much larger and has now fallen very far. But I can say for McKeesport, even though this is a very odd stretch of the gap, it is well signed. So even though it could look like any old stretch of road or sidewalk, you are rarely in doubt as to your routing. That's important. Wayfinding can make or break any trail. Hell, the definition of a trail is wayfinding. You don't even have to have a contiguous stretch of asphalt. Okay, let's hop back on the trail for a second and decide the best way back to the gap. It appears, while the loop trail actually ends, I could keep going and pass through.
Please keep in mind, this is the US of uneducated America, with places like New Madrid and Cairo, so as much as it pains me, the town is in fact actually pronounced
Versailles. I don't think I've ever been to Versailles. This is a very large and depressing abandoned structure. Metal siding, rust streaked down it. These are also clearly not the most affluent of neighborhoods, which is a shame. We definitely need to be more like the socialist democracies of Europe. There should be more assistance lifting people up.
Unless, of course, they are conservatives who vote for racist, homophobic, misogynistic, transphobic, Zionist fascists, in which event they deserve to be pushed down and completely amputated from society.
Because fundamentally, nobody should have to live here. Nobody should be born into something like this and then stay it.
The more well-traveled I become, the more it boggles my mind how so many people have pride in their little communities. For example, I once had the misfortune of living in Huntington, Long Island, where you were assaulted by a sign at the village entrance proclaiming it to be the best small town in America. Sure, it was one of the notably not completely shitty places on Long Island, but that is less an endorsement of Huntington and more an indictment of the competition. It's like, really, are you so sure it's the best small town in America? Have you heard of Davis, or Bellingham, or Boulder, or Santa Barbara, Oceanside, Ann Arbor, St. Augustine, Marquette, Winston-Salem, Denton, Bloomington Normal, Charlottesville, either Athens, either Waterbury, any Springfield except Mass, or hell, even Montclair, Morristown, New Brunswick, Poughkeepsie, and Yonkers, the latter of which are all in your own backyard? How in the world are you so overwhelmingly sure that Huntington is the best small town in America when I can pull all of those examples off the top of my head just from the places that I myself have visited? It's dangerously uninformed at best and unforgivably arrogant at worst. Of course, there's always a matter of personal preference, which will vary from person to person and make it difficult to make universal proclamations as to which places are truly better, but more importantly, that every right-thinking person will agree that Chicago is better than Detroit or that San Francisco is better than Reno proves that there's nonetheless an objective standard of place goodness, which at least makes coarse comparisons not only accurate, but obvious. I've spoken with a ton of other well-traveled people before, and especially among the ones who have lived in multiple very different places, there's a secret consensus that you cannot trust the opinions of people who are born, grew up, live, and die in the same region, or worse, the same city. It doesn't matter how long you've lived in a place such that you know it to incredible depth. That you lack breadth means that your experiences are all uncalibrated, and that you're living in the same water means that you've acclimated as quaint quirks of living in a place things which anywhere else would be considered unacceptable municipal failures. Again, there is a humongous difference between the statements, "I like it here," and "here is a good place." The former is perfectly fine, but asserting the latter in the absence of passing the smell test makes your feelings untrustworthy. Sure, you should take enjoyment in the places that you're in, make your happiness where you are, and I'm not ordering everyone to be miserable unless you live in Flatbush, Lincoln Park, or Santa Monica. But what I am saying is that you absolutely should recognize and fully admit to the limitations of your community and approximately where those drawbacks stand on a broader, possibly even global scale. Have pride in where you are, but do not let that pride absolve yourself of a recognition of your place's flaws or a duty to make it better. For the life of me, I cannot comprehend why anyone lives in McKeesport or similar collapsing small towns when Pittsburgh is just over the way with roughly equivalent rents and schools, but objectively better literally everything else.
Fundamentally, I'm a city boy, which is odd because I've never really exactly lived in a big city type setting, only ever on the outskirts, and that drives me nuts because then I have to suffer through the paywall of time, gas money, and vehicle depreciation in order to actually do anything interesting. But my opposition to small towns, it's ugly, unappealing, depressing, and very sad, and I think that all the people who are trapped here deserve a chance to get out. I, however, will not be going in. Tiger steel with some old railroad tracks buried in the asphalt and gravel. The trail is currently one of their access roads, just curving around and through the structure. No barrier, no protection. Oh, those are a lot of broken glass bricks rotting away. Goodness, even graffiti artists don't think this is too important to place. I can see like only one or two taggings. The rest of it is all just rust and empty nothingness. I wouldn't exactly quite call this a trail, but I guess at least thanks for thinking about us. And out and back on the Gap is probably more satisfying than this graveyard of industry. So the only other way to have done this trip would have been to go in the opposite direction. Park the car in Pittsburgh, train the bike to Connellsville, and then go back. But the Capital Limited schedules are similarly inconvenient. I was faced with either a midnight arrival or a 6 a.m. departure from Pittsburgh. Either way, I would have had to stay overnight in Pittsburgh, but I thought that the midnight arrival would have been slightly more pleasant.
Slightly less unpleasant. A little later, I figured my way through the rest of the loop trail.
So, this is Boston, on the other side of the river from Versailles. The other Boston, not that Boston.
The other Versailles, not that Versailles.
It's interesting, the catchment area of the trail is the most gentrified part, and the entire rest of the community is fairly impoverished. So that kind of shows you how important it is to have modern infrastructure for modern sensibilities. Basically bike trails, transit, and eco-friendly transportation and recreation options. I severely doubt that Boston would have had such an interesting little area if it had, say, tried to serve local hunters or fishermen. Mile marker 128. I have been biking now for 1 hour and 48 minutes, but I am back on the Gap Trail proper. I think West Newton is next. I also passed a bunch of signs that said they were grateful for the donations to the Boston Trail Coalition. That's one of the interesting features of the Gap and trails like it, is that there are usually a bunch of small community, largely volunteer organizations that pop up to maintain it. Not only just like beautifying it for the community, but again, it also feeds back. A nice trail to ride on is one that people will ride on, and they will stop off at trailside businesses. For some reason, they seem to be extremely popular for this end of the Gap and other trails in the Pittsburgh area as well. The Montour Trail, actually, and I thought this was fascinating, they even have a designated trail patrol team. So during weekends of the summer, people in very large yellow vests that say Trail Patrol will ride simply up and down the trail with spare bottles of water, first aid kits, and trail maps on the back of their bike, ready to help anybody using the trail in need. I think that's fantastic. Honestly, more places should do that.
I've never encountered something before which so directly contributes to a sense of community identity. I mean, sure, you could plant petunias in a roundabout, or host a touch-a-truck at a fire station for the 2% of a person's life in which it appeals to them, when they're literal children, or you could, build an actually useful and enjoyable amenity, like a trail system, then ensure its well-being with community stewards who help you if you need it, and put a face to the places you're traveling through. Trails create a sense of locality, roads destroy it. Anyway, a little later on,
didn't I tell myself I needed to take a break every 16 kilometers? Well, looks like it's been 32 since the last time I took a step off. Okay, two other major things I want to talk about during this episode, anyway. First one is my bike packing setup. I have 2 Ortlieb panniers that attach to a nice rack that I have over the rear wheel. And then on top of the rack is a Toe Peak MTX trunk, I guess. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the Toe Peak racks, they actually offer a system for sliding on and off with a kind of a little clip that holds the trunk bag in place, and it allows you to swap out the trunk bag with a bicycle basket that, again, just slides forward and locks in with a plastic clasp. That has been absolutely invaluable for me as I try to reduce my car dependency, and I can trade out the trunk for the basket whenever I need to go shopping at the local grocery store.
Inside the trunk bag, I have standard bicycle day trip items, like a patch kit, an emergency pump, tire levers, a light rain jacket, sunscreen, and emergency supplies like a first aid kit, water bottle, and a few granola bars that really became granola dust over the years. The Ortlieb panniers, to those who don't know, are a standard among bicyclists, about 20 liters each, coming in pairs, and being made of rubberized fabric with roll-top buckle enclosures to make for maximum waterproofness. These simply attach to any horizontal tube on the rear of a bicycle rack and lock in place with spring-loaded clips, most ingeniously disengaged by pulling on a carrying handle. I've since added 2 6-ish liter front fork bags. While some bicycle forks have mounting attachments, called bosses, for front racks, for most that's a scary proposition because it requires getting a specialty fork and rack, as well as puts full-size bags on the front wheel which can shift around for harder steering. Instead, Ortlieb offers fork bags that are smaller and much more secure, and which can be attached to any fork at all with a simple rubberized metal strap secured simply by twisting a screw. I would like to re-emphasize that I started with none of this completed. I had originally but a backpack and a sleeping pad roped to the rear rack, but through the years and from experience, I have learned tweaks here and there and acquired equipment piece by piece that have allowed me to become a truly ultra-refined camping adventurer. You don't have to be fully equipped right at the outset. Start with a day trip, then a single overnight, then grow bit by bit, getting only a single piece of new equipment per trip or even per summer. You're not expected to know or have everything right off the bat, and it's best to incrementally explore at your own pace, especially if you're intimidated by wilderness adventure. In the intervening years, my setup has reached an even more spectacular simplicity. In lugging my panniers on and off many an Amtrak train, I discovered primarily during the New York City trip last January that I could put the 2 large panniers back to back, daisy chain them into a circle by clipping together their matching buckles, threading the loops of the front panniers through each rear pannier buckle daisy chain, and lifting the whole shebang with one hand by the unclipping handles of the large panniers. It's unexpectedly massively convenient, and together with my backpack, gives me almost 100 liters of storage capacity. Car campers, eat your heart out. On this trip, the 2 rear panniers plus the backpack were, together, far more than I needed for a single overnight, but I decided to bring them along both filled with extra clothing, ablutionary material, sleeping bag, tent, pillow, and pad, just in the event of an unexpected disaster, but also to practice long-distance bicycle touring, which then was still new to me. Probably the best and most versatile part of the equipment, however, is my backpack. The
Alpine Stars Rover Overland. It is a backpack with a roll top, so it's waterproof. Importantly, it also has lots of zippered pockets, allowing me to segregate things based on need, in addition to the main waterproof compartment where I have my laptop and a book and a magazine. But the thing that I love the most about it, which apparently started only recently in the motorcycling world and is now becoming very popular, is the strap. It is not a regular backpack strap over the shoulder and back through the armpit, which, especially under load, is extremely uncomfortable. Instead, it's a sternum strap. So imagine 4 straps, almost like a 5-point harness in a sense, and they all arc up to a single rotatable plastic buckle right at the center of the sternum. This backpack has so much capacity, possibly even more than I would need, but the cinched down straps on the outside make it possible to not be too big or needlessly floppy. At some point I'll also discuss my camping setup, but seeing as I'm not using it on this trip, it seems better discussed elsewhere. Oh, and finally, the backpack also has a slot for a Camelback water pouch. Mile marker 120. If I recall, I think Connellsville is about, 30 miles away? So West Newton represents maybe a little more than halfway. I'm not particularly certain. Where I will stop at the Trailside Cafe there for lunch / breakfast / possibly dinner too, now that I'm food poor and hotel rich. Now that's the way to do it. Welcome to West Newton, a Gap Trail town. Gap Trail campground. Sail on the trail. Community events at the trail now. That's interesting. See, you can have a modern identity in a small town. You just have to change with the times. Open today, The Outpost, River's Edge Eatery. Actually, that might be interesting. West Newton Station, small sitting area. There's a combine car for the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie. And then there's also Fox's Pizza. Oh, goodness. Okay. I will go to the Outpost Eatery where it seems that there are a lot of people. And then the so-called draft wagon right next to it.
Yes, good. That's perfect, honey. Thank you.
That was a very satisfying hour. I got a veggie burger and some poutine and gravy. The last time I was here with my roommate, we traveled across the river to Newton proper, and we went to this fantastic little place called Bloom Brew. Well, it seems that Bloom Brew has opened up what they're calling a draft wagon. They have 4 their little flavors on tap right next to the Trailside Outpost. So in checking the map, it appears that this is about the halfway point, maybe a little over. I am still ahead of schedule, which is nice, but this is definitely going to be the more boring part of the trail. Also, I will note that my e-bike is down to 2 of 5 ticks of battery life. Now, the useful thing though about an e-bike is that a dead e-bike is still a bike. A dead electric car is dead. So I will be coming into Connellsville on fumes and under my own power, which might make it take a little bit longer and be more arduous. I did bring my charging cable with me, but I checked and there were no wall outlets at the outpost, so I'll be getting a proper workout today. No denying that. But I can think about those fantastic artisanal ice cream sandwiches at the Kickstand Cafe in Connellsville. That would be satisfying. At mile marker 102, weight limit 10 tons. I don't know if my emotional baggage will fit. Clearly an old railroad tunnel and bridge. It's basically one lane. Uh-oh. There is a car coming. Will fit. I will. Another car, however, would not. I think I've been through here on my car once long ago. I think I wanted to visit Perryopolis just because how many other places in this world are named Perryopolis. But I don't think I noticed this one. Oh yeah, look, railroad tracks. Okay, so clearly that was some sort of branch connecting with the main line. So I am on the other side of the Akagani. I do like a nice macadam cycle surface. It makes it smooth and pleasant, but it also adds drag. Lots of drag, making it, especially after a long day, exhausting. And very pleasant when I get the privilege to ride asphalt again. Okay, 2-track railroad crossing. Ooh. Oh goodness. I think this is the 3/4 way mark. And I have about maybe another hour and a half in front of me, something like that. The Silence of the Lambs film location, overnight stays, and guided tours. Welcome to Buffalo Bill's house.
I simply have to plug my friends at CityCast Pittsburgh here for having done interviews with the owner of the property and episodes on the history of the film linked in the show notes, if I remember to do so.
It's an old brick house. Yeah, I'll circle around it just for the hell of it. Yes, Buffalo Bill's house from the movie. Just less than 5 minutes across the river bridge. This is a very, very tiny town. Okay. Google Maps is saying 93 minutes to Connellsville, but unfortunately I will be losing e-bike battery life in, what is it saying, 6 miles. So that's about maybe halfway to Connellsville. So the last few kilometers will be very slow going. Well, it says bridge weight limit 17 tons from over here. That's alright. Going back through the railroad tunnel and a very interesting brick tunnel portal emerging out of a solid rock face. So it's about maybe 12 miles to Connellsville, somewhere around milepost 95, 96. I'll look for a day use area where I can pull off and rest my haunches. This is nice. This is very peaceful. I'm actually a little closer to milepost 98, so yeah, the fatigue is definitely getting to me. But it's not the first time I might have been a mote aggressive in my adventuring. I think Google Maps is telling me it's about an hour more. So, all things considered, not the worst.
The last thing I wanted to cover on the trip was my bicycle, what I was riding, and the story of how I got it.
So, I have a Trek Dual Sport Plus, which is an e-bike. The story goes that I had a Trek Dual Sport from my teenage years. My family picked it up on a trip to Portland, and I had it for, I don't know, maybe 7 to 10 years. And that was kind of like the recreational bicycle. When family decides to go on bicycle rides, that's the one that I take. After graduating University of Washington, I started taking a few regional trips around the Seattle area. They have an extensive bike trail network, and I would, on days I had off, just ride some of them. Some were long, some were short, nothing too special. I moved to Long Island in 2017, seminal cornerstone of my life for how much it changed how I look at the world. Or, well, it didn't change me. I was kind of already this way. I picked that up by living in Seattle. Instead, moving to New York forced me to educate myself about how I look at the world, to put words to what I was seeing, and then think about them to explain what was good and what was not. While I was there, I had, of course, moved away from all of my friends and family, and I couldn't exactly rely on people to help me when the car broke down. That, and it was also a wretched car-dependent suburb. One day, my car actually did break down, and I needed to drop it off for repairs, and I was kind of trapped. So I ended up having to, for about a week, bicycle commute back and forth from work to home, which was a 90-minute one-way bicycle ride along a lot of roads that did not in any way have bicycle accommodation. Some of the shoulders were as narrow as a couple of inches. Not great. But that showed me how a bicycle could fit into my everyday life, I started to enjoy it as much as I hated the length and being forced into it. And I also just hated driving as a commute. Sure, it was a quick, almost blissful 10, 11 minutes from where I lived, but it just felt so sterile and unpleasant in every way. And I vowed then to find a place where I could realistically bicycle commute wherever I worked and lived next. It's one of the reasons that drove me to a college town, because that's a very, very easy thing for them to check the box on. During the semester, 52% of the population is under the poverty level, so there's a lot of bicycling. So even by the normal lax standards of American multimodal infrastructure, college towns still tend to exceed at some of the basic things due to an overabundance of need. Anyway, I commuted with my Trek Dual Sport there for a year. There was one hill, but thankfully it was uphill in the morning, downhill in the evening, and it wasn't so bad overall. And I enjoyed it. But, you see, my bike was starting to show its age. A rusty part here, a banged frame there. At some point, I was overdue a replacement. This was, I think, 2019, and it was kind of at the very, very beginning of the mass market e-bike craze. I was potentially open to getting an e-bike. I still kind of had a little bit in my head that, oh, that's cheating, I am a pure bicyclist. But then I started trying all the bikes in town to see if there were any that I wanted. And this is where the college town kind of bites back. Practically all of the bikes at all three major bike shops in town were targeted at one of two markets. Either the faculty mammals, that is, middle-aged men in Lycra, who were obsessive road bikers who wanted something that weighed 2.5 pounds and was made entirely out of composite carbon nanotubes or whatever. And they road biked more as a form of exercise than transportation. Then on the other end of the market, you have the college students who are really poor, undiscerning, and just need something cheap. Any set of 2 wheels, brakes, and an axle, it doesn't matter what form it takes. So, I was sitting somewhere in the middle. I wanted a good machine, but I wanted something that I could use every day for something other than exercise. I'd needed transportation. It would have to have a rack to fit my, well, I call it my briefcase. In reality, it's just an Ortlieb pannier that is rectangular and has a laptop sleeve in it. But the only options that fit that were the really cheap, poor build quality ones targeted at the undergrads. So that didn't work. I tried over a dozen bikes in State College. I then started looking outside of State College. I went to another nearby town, a little bit of a college town, a little bit more of a regular town called Lock Haven. Tried some bicycles there. Again, still same thing. I ended up going all the way to Altoona. The thing is, all of these bikes that I was trying, none of them were as good as my decade-old current bicycle, which kind of defeats the purpose of, you know, buying a new bicycle. So that's the standard that I set myself, that I would only buy a bike that was better. Otherwise I would, I don't know, have to have a sit down with myself and learn bicycle maintenance and overhaul and replace it part by part. But then I learned that Trek actually made an e-bike version of the Dual Sport, these Dual Sport Plus. Since then, I think actually the Dual Sport Plus branding has been discontinued, and they now have kind of a separate line of e-bikes. I think that this one would be closer to, one of them has an A name, like, I don't know, Avant, and another one has a V name, like, I don't know, Vestige or something. It's mostly just branding. I think the Dual Sport Plus is effectively, plus or minus a few tweaks through the years, one of those two. So what is a Dual Sport, and why do I like it? Well, there are kind of two major types of bicycles. There's the mountain bike, which I'm certain you could imagine. Big, beefy, knobby tires, front and rear suspension, and those are meant for doing things in the wilderness, soaring high through the air and crashing down after a landing. The other end of the spectrum, you have road bikes. Those are very thin, sleek tires, very lightweight, no suspension, because suspension adds weight. And why would you do that when you could instead just stand on the pedals? In recent years, the middle has been filled out. There are gravel bikes, which are kind of road bikes made mountain. They don't necessarily have suspension, but they have flexible forks softening some of the bumps. They still probably have drop-down handles for heavy road biking, and maybe they have slightly more aggressive tires, still probably a little bit skinnier. Then you have the final category, hybrid bikes, which are mountain bikes made road. You lose the rear suspension, but you keep the front suspension, which does help a lot in taking out some of the worst bumps. They usually still have very large tires in comparison to road bikes, but they usually have a little bit more of a multi-surface tread. And then they also usually have gearing ratios that are a little bit larger than road bikes. They're not meant for sustained speed. Instead, they are meant for both high-end but more very low-end speeds. Say if you're going up a steep embankment. The Trek Dual Sport was a hybrid bike. And unfortunately, most of what I was seeing in town, they were all gravel bikes. But then I went to Altoona, learned of the e-bike version of the Trek Dual Sport, and on a whim, I asked them to ship one over. Now, this particular year, again 2019, was the beginning of the e-bike craze. As it turned out, Trek had oversold their market projections by 6,000%, or so the person told me. E-bikes were flying off the shelves, and there were barely any left in the country at the time. Except there were 2 Trek Dual Sport Pluses that existed. One of them was an extra small frame, I think somewhere up in Massachusetts, but I'm a giant, that doesn't work. The other one was an extra large frame, I think in Malibu or Santa Cruz or something. The reason why these bikes were unsold is because nobody needed the obscene frame size variances that I did. I needed an extra large frame. So they shipped it over, and I finally got a chance to test ride it. I think I ultimately ended up test riding 24 or 26 different bikes, at least before I lost count. And it was, well, love at first bike. Ultimately, the thing that convinced me to get this as an e-bike is because even with the motor off, it was still the best bike that I had ridden that entire time. It was the one that had the widest range of functionality, the most options for additional add-ons as I would go on to perfect and optimize my bicycling outfit. And it was also an e-bike. I didn't have to use the motor. This is the pedal assist type, so you're only getting motor power if your own legs are moving. It's not a throttle like a motorcycle. So it's, to some, cheating, but it's closer to the actual thing than the mini mopeds or motorcycles that other e-bikes are. And ultimately, if I ever want to stop cheating and get a full-on workout, I could turn the motor off and it becomes a regular bicycle. And if I just wanted a quick, easy commute, I could turn the motor on. It's an e-bike, it's there. Or say that I'm bicycling along happily, and then all of a sudden, oh shit, there's a big hill. I don't have it in me. I can turn the motor on high and glide up to the top of the hill and then carry on from where I was. So this bike has 4 modes: Eco, Tour, Sport, and Turbo. The vast majority of the time, I use it in its lowest mode, Eco. Very rarely will I ever go above that, in part mostly just to preserve battery life. Sometimes, if I'm, say, late for lab meeting, well, okay, maybe it's time for Turbo mode. It doesn't necessarily take the strain off me. It's not an easy, complete absence of a workout. It's more like I get just a little bit extra for putting in the same amount of work. The highest mode, Turbo, is, I think, 260% power match, so you're really cooking there. But the lowest mode, Eco, the one that I use the most, is, I think, only a 40% power match. But, and here's the interesting thing, it's an e-bike. It also is a chunker. It weighs a lot. 55 pounds. More than twice as heavy as a normal bike of its size. So the way I view it is that for the most part in eco mode, it's kind of just carrying its own weight. Maybe a little extra.
But in the rare events I really need the extra power, unlike a normal bicycle, it's there. Overall, though, probably the major reason why I love having an e-bike is because I don't have to remember to charge separate batteries for the headlights, taillights, and bike computer.
And so far, I have fallen in love with this bicycle and the concept of being a bicyclist overall. Not like a bike commuter, not a road bike fiend, but more of somebody who enjoys seeing the world and interacting with it at the speed of bicycle. It's like walking, but less boring and a little faster. And it has cargo options. I can carry along my briefcase, I can throw on a backpack, and I can bring these panniers too. At some point, I may even expand that further and get a front rack to allow for front panniers, and then a so-called pizza rack, which would allow me to strap things of arbitrary size down. That'll be quite useful. I do have actually one additional attachment for it that I made use of liberally during the pandemic. I have a cooler that mounts to the back rack, so I can literally go tailgating off the back of my bicycle. That's how a lot of my friends and I maintained contact. We would go to parks, outdoors, sit at opposite ends of a picnic blanket, and we would libate away from the back of the cooler. Sometimes I even actually strapped pizza to the top of the cooler. Haven't used it though that much for the past few years, less of a need. I've kind of become more of a solo explorer in the past few years, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I keep my friends plentiful at home, but if I want to go out and explore the world, I don't need to wait for somebody else to come along. If they want to, that's fine. If not, that's also fine. The only other note, I guess, is I have a bicycle helmet from POC. It actually has a small RFID thing in it that's used by search and rescue people to help identify bodies in avalanches or rock slides, for example. It's also very sleek. It's mostly black on the front with a patch of white and I think maybe a pop or two of reflectivity on the rear.
In contrast to the grayscale bicycle and grayscale helmet, I also for a while had Monkey Electric bicycle wheel lights, which would flash lights along the spokes to make pictures at night when traveling over 10 miles an hour, thinking that brightly blasting every color known to the human eyeball would act as a safety feature to avoid being vehicularly homicided by a suburban serial killer. I mean motorist.
And that's my setup. The cafe lock, which I mentioned last time, which actually also has a plug-in chain option for looping around things. And then, thanks to Trek cooperating with A-Bus, the lock maker, both the battery, which is hidden in the down tube of the bicycle, and the chain lock have the same key. So it's just a wonderful and sleek little system there. Very enjoyable. Mile marker 95. I will use my last 3 miles of juice, and I will probably end up sputtering into Connellsville. I will grab myself. At this point, I'm half tempted to make it one of every one of the ice cream sandwiches. I think they had 4 or so flavors. That's enough of my rambling for now. The bike died, milepost 92. I have made it to Connellsville, to the camping area. How many times have I been through here? My goodness. Okay, what does it say? 59 miles to Pittsburgh. All in a single day. No! The Kickstand Cafe is closed. What the hell? It's like it's a weekend. This is prime gap time. Okay, well, I'll find something else. Seems that the yard switcher is still doing its thing. I think it's the same locomotive, same setup as before. Oh my goodness. I think this is what some qualify as an adventure. Okay, this does appear to be a remote control switcher. There's nobody on any of the footplates or in either of the cabs. and it is really zipping along, going backwards and forwards. It's really surprising to me that it could do that, because I would think that you would want to at least have somebody sighting down the rails where it's going. This is not deep in a rail yard. This is a dozen meters from a pedestrian platform. So what if somebody stupid decides to go down to the riverside, and then this thing comes zipping around the corner? But, oh well, as long as nobody's dead yet, that's really all that matters. Okay. Trip summary. Yeah, I think it worked. I had fun doing field recording. I think I do have it in me. I will obviously improve with time, but I think I have enough of it in me now to make it interesting without needing to improve yet. It was fun to be on Amtrak. I missed doing that a lot. I wish I had more time. It was always fun going on a bicycle ride. I didn't necessarily learn too much because, of course, I didn't necessarily... Oh, yeah.
12 minutes later.
Okay. I didn't necessarily learn anything new because I have already done this before. And no, I guess I did get to go to the Fort Pitt Blockhouse Museum. That was new. I did get to go to Primonti's. That was wonderful. That was very successful. It was not necessarily as train-centric as I would have liked, and that will always be a risk with this kind of weird shared purpose between urban planning and model trains. But don't worry, I think I have a few ideas of things I can do in the future up my sleeve. It's going to take a lot of time. I'm much more motivated to do it now than I have been before, in part because I'm directly tying the podcast to the things that I enjoy rather than the original concept, which was more of just pure egalitarian service to the hobby. So I think it will be easier to keep myself motivating, seeing as I'll really only be writing episodes and episode topics, or recording, as I did today, about things that I frankly care about and would want to do anyway. I think I'll be able to turn this into a more consistent thing that I churn out on a more regular basis, but also it's a lot of writing and editing, so I really don't know how much of it I'll be able to keep up. I will try to shoot for monthly. I don't know if that's remotely achievable. It depends on how simple every episode is, and to that end, maybe a lot of them might be shorter and much less well-produced, but just maybe a simple update walking around the layout room, talking about the things I've done just to keep me accountable, and also put together something that's very easy to make. That's kind of where things are at the moment. Obviously, you will probably hear plenty more as time goes on, as this concept evolves. Hopefully, I can do more traveling. Maybe I can take you along on some of my trips to various big cities where I ride all of their transit. Maybe as I continue to give the 3 presentations at NMRA events, maybe I can wrap those into trips as well. So who knows, maybe you might also get like a good old-fashioned interview one-on-one if somebody decides to sit down with me and talk it out. That's probably a bit fanciful at this point, thinking a little bit farther out than I can forecast. But otherwise, overall, I think that's kind of how things are looking to go. So yeah, that's that. I hope you enjoyed it. I am going to hop in the car and find a way to get some ice cream because I think I really deserve it.
Sadly, I never did find a place to get ice cream that day. This has been a very windy episode 12 of the Proto-Future podcast, Gap Pilot Part 2. The theme music is Spark of Life by Benjamin Lazarus through Tribe of Noise. Sound effects in this episode are by Dave Gertzman through freesound.org. I would like to thank my extremely generous and patient patrons Pedro Reyes, Ron Kleiss, Bill Ford, Linda Eskin, and Roger Coleman, and extra special thanks to Roger Coleman for mastering this episode. If you would like to know more, you can visit the website at www.bgtmrring.org. That's Bravo Golf Tango, Michael Romeo Romeo, Indigo November Golf, Oscar Romeo Golf. To listen to the Manifesto and Prologue series, watch the Modern Modeling Clinic anthology, or read the free-to-access Patreon production blog. And please consider donating on a monthly basis to help defer hosting and equipment costs and support what I do. This content is provisionally CAN-credentialed. You can report instances of harassment, abuse, or other harm to their hotline at 617-249-4255, or on their website at creatoraccountabilitynetwork.org. This podcast was written, recorded, and produced on the ancestral lands of the Susquehannock, Osage, Monongahela, Shawnee, Massawomek, Lenni Lenape, Quatsayan, Kumiayas, Kuhila, Luceño, Serrano, Tongva, Juaneño, Tataviam, Chumash, Fernandeño, Ventureño Chumash, Barbareño Chumash, Iniseño, Amawu, Salinan, Obispeño, Esalin, Amamutsun, Chalon, Rumsen, Ohlone, Awaswas, Moekma, Tamian Nation, Confederated Villages of Lycian, Miwok, Karkin, Patwin, Nisayan, Cayusi, Umatilla, Walla Walla, Conco, Machupta, Yana, Namlaki, Northern Wintu, Daupon Wintu, Elpon Wintu, Clubal Wintu, Winnemem Wintu, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Achamawi, Modoc, Pit River, Waymok, Owanuchu, Shasta, Nomtipom Wintu, Nomsus Wintu, Malala, Cow Creek Umpqua, Tekelma, Klamath, Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, Kalapuya, Yamkala, Winnefeli, Chaffin, Sankupi, Santiam, Anchuyuk, Ahanchuyuk, Clackamas, Cowlitz, Multnomah, Klickitat, Chehalis, Nisqually, Squaxin, Puyallup, Muckleshoot, Jawamish, Stillaguamish, Squamish, Snoqualmie, Tulalip, Swinomish, Sklallam, Samish, Lumi, Semiahoo, and Wasanich tribes. I would like to thank them for their historical stewardship of Pennsylvania, California, Oregon, and Washington. Thank you very much for listening. Keep riding trains, keep punching Nazis, and keep building a better future. No, unzip.